am feeling so dizzy and weak. What is happening to me? Hey, what are you trying to do? Oh, it's so painful as you are inserting it into me. This the story of a virgin on Valentine Day? Listen to the end, and please support us by clicking the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Leave a comment below. Zainab sat on the veranda of her small family home, looking out over the sprawling village that stretched out before her. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the earthy rooftops of her neighbors' homes. The day had been warm, as it often was in their rural Nigerian village, where the only relief from the heat came with the gentle evening breeze. But despite the peacefulness of her surroundings, Zainab's mind was far from calm. It was February, and the air was thick with anticipation. Valentine's Day was approaching. Growing up in a tight-knit community, Zainab had always been taught to value her innocence, her purity, and to keep her heart and body reserved for the man she would one day marry. Her father, a respected village elder, had instilled in her a deep respect for tradition, while her mother, ever so kind and nurturing, had shaped her into a compassionate young woman. But, like many girls her age, Zainab found herself standing at a crossroads between her upbringing and the world she was beginning to see outside her small village. The village was a peaceful place, but it was also one steeped in its own set of expectations. Young women were expected to follow certain paths, and for the most part, those paths involved marriage and family, not romance or fleeting desires. Zainab had been raised with stories of strong women, the ones who stayed true to their values, the ones who didn't let their hearts wander until the right time. And yet, in her own heart, she had begun to feel something she could not easily ignore. It wasn't something she could explain in clear terms, but it was therein uneasiness, a yearning for something more than the life her parents had planned for her. Valentine's Day had always been an event she viewed with some suspicion. While it wasn't celebrated in the same extravagant ways in the village as it was in the cities, it was still a day that carried significance. A day to express love, affection, and sometimes desire. But for Zainab, Valentine's Day had always been a reminder of what she was expected to be pure, untouched, and waiting for the day she would meet her future husband. It wasn't that she didn't believe in love. She did. In fact, she had seen it around her, in the way her parents interacted with each other, in the way her father's gaze softened when he looked at her mother. But there was something in the air during Valentine's Day that made her feel more isolated than ever before. Her friends would talk about love, about crushes, about boys they had begun to notice. Zainab, however, had always kept quiet. She had never been one to indulge in the kinds of conversations her peers had. It wasn't because she didn't want to. It was because she had always felt that there was an unspoken pressure to remain the girl who was above it all, the one who could not be easily swayed by the attention of boys. Yet, even Zainab could not deny the way her heart fluttered when she thought about Chaik. Chaik was different from the boys she had known in the village. He wasn't from their small, isolated community. He was from Lagos, the city that Zainab had only heard about in stories. Chaik had come to visit the village during the last harvest season, and ever since then, he had been on Zainab's mind. He was everything she had ever imagined: handsome, charming, well-spoken. His smile was contagious, and he had this way of making people feel seen. Zainab, who had always been somewhat reserved, found herself drawn to him, not just for his looks, but for the way he listened. He would often ask her about her dreams, her hopes for the future, as though she had the power to shape her own destiny. Chaik had sent her a message earlier in the week. The words were simple, but they sent a shiver of excitement down her spine. "Zainab, I hope you'll be free this Valentine's Day. I would love to see you. It's been far too long since we last spoke." Those words echoed in her mind as she sat there, staring out at the village. Should she go? Should she let herself experience what so many of her friends talked about with such ease? Her thoughts were clouded with uncertainty. Chaik had been kind to her, respectful even, and he had shown no signs of rushing or pressuring her. But now, as the date approached, Zainab wondered if he was testing her, pushing her to see if she would give in to the temptation of something that was not part of her world. Her heart longed for adventure, for something beyond the boundaries of her small village life. But deep down, she knew that her family's expectations weighed heavily on her. The elders of the village often spoke of the importance of preserving one's innocence, and her parents, especially her mother, had always encouraged her to wait. Zainab's mother would tell her stories of the girls who had given in to temptation and how their lives had been forever altered. It wasn't that Zainab didn't believe in love or affection, she did, but her love for Cheek had always felt more like a fantasy, something unattainable. They came from different worlds, after all. But now, as she sat with that letter from Cheek in her hand, something had shifted within her. She felt a spark, a curiosity she had never felt before. What if she could experience love on her own terms? What if she could spend this Valentine's Day in a way that felt right for her? She tried to imagine the day with Chikatay City. The lights, the excitement. It was a dream, a vision of something new and thrilling. Zainab had never been to Lagos. She had only seen it in pictures, in the stories of distant relatives who had moved there for a better life. The idea of escaping her village for even just a day was tempting, yet the weight of her upbringing pressed on her shoulders like a heavy stone. Could she really do it? Could she go and enjoy herself without feeling guilty? The fear of her parents' disappointment loomed in her mind, but the pull of Chike's invitation was hard to ignore. Zainab sat in silence for a long while, the sound of the crickets chirping in the distance the only noise in the air. She stared at the message again, her fingers trembling as she held the phone. It seemed so simple, so harmless. A visit, a chance to see a world she had only heard about. But what would that mean for her? Would it change everything? Would it make her someone she didn't recognize? She closed her eyes and imagined the day. The laughter, the joy, the freedom of being far from the watchful eyes of her village. In the end, she knew that the decision was hers. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Zainab couldn't help but feel as though something bigger than herself was pulling her toward the unknown. She had made up her mind. She would go to Lagos. She would visit Chike, and she would see for herself what it meant to step outside of the life she had always known. Zainab's fingers trembled slightly as she held her phone, gazing at Cheek's message once again. Her heart fluttered, a mixture of excitement and nervousness stirring in her chest. The words, "I would love to see you," echoed in her mind like a gentle whisper, urging her to make a decision. She had spent the entire afternoon trying to weigh the consequences of her actions, but no matter how much she thought about it, the reality was clear: she wanted to go. It wasn't just the allure of visiting Lagos or spending time with Chike that tempted her, though that was certainly part of it. It was something deeper, something intangible, that she had never allowed herself to explore before. She had always lived within the boundaries of what her parents expected, what the village elders expected, and what her peers expected of her. She had lived her life by a strict set of rules about respect, purity, and the sanctity of waiting for the right time to experience love. But now, as she stood on the precipice of adulthood, those rules seemed more like chains, holding her back from experiencing life fully. Zainab's thoughts turned to her parents. Her mother, especially, was a constant voice in her life, always reminding her to preserve her innocence. She had taught Zainab to carry herself with grace and dignity, to hold on to her purity until marriage, until she was sure that the love she gave would be returned in the same measure. Her mother's words were a constant presence in her life, echoing in her head every time she felt tempted to make a decision that went against the grain. Yet her father, though stern in his own way, had always been more focused on the practicalities of life. He had spoken less about love, more about respect for tradition, the importance of family, and the expectations that came with their roles in society. Zainab had always admired her father's quiet strength, but she couldn't ignore the fact that his worldview was narrow, bound by the beliefs of their community. There was little room for personal choice or romantic exploration in the life he envisioned for her. But now, as she thought of Chike, those rules seemed less certain. What if this trip wasn't just a frivolous desire? What if it was an opportunity for Zainab to grow, to experience something outside of her limited world? Her mind swirled with conflicting thoughts, each one pulling her in a different direction. She wanted to know what it felt like to be desired, to experience a kind of affection that went beyond the traditional expectations of her village. What if there was more to love than the strict, calculated arrangements that her family had always envisioned for her? The phone vibrated in her hand, snapping her out of her thoughts. Chaik's name appeared on the screen again, and a rush of emotions flooded her heart. She hadn't responded to his message yet. The uncertainty had been too overwhelming, but now, faced with his continued effort to reach out to her, she felt the pressure to respond. Her fingers hovered over the screen, as if the simple act of pressing send could change the course of her life forever. Zainab took a deep breath and pressed the reply button. Her message was short, but her heart raced as she typed the words, "I'll come to Lagos. I'll see you on Valentine's Day." For a moment, she stared at the screen, wondering if she had made the right decision. It felt like a leap of faith, one that she was not sure she was ready to take. But the excitement that had been bubbling inside her since she first received the invitation now surged through her veins. She had made her choice. And somehow, despite the fear that gripped her heart, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement at the thought of stepping into a world she had only imagined. The days that followed passed in a blur. Zainab busied herself with preparations for the trip, though she felt a gnawing sense of guilt each time she spoke to her mother or her father. They asked little about her plans for Valentine's Day, but Zainab knew they assumed she would stay in the village as always. It wasn't as if they expected her to leave for a distant city on a whim. But each time she looked into her mother's eyes, she saw the silent expectations that Zainab knew she was about to defy. Her mother had always warned her about the dangers of the outside world. In their village, there were unspoken rules about what young girls should and shouldn't do. There were whispers about girls who had gone astray, who had been led astray by city boys and promises of love. Those girls never returned the same. Their reputation was ruined, and their families were left to bear the shame. Zainab had always been so careful to follow her mother's advice, but now, as she prepared to leave, those warnings seemed like distant echoes. On the morning of Valentine's Day, Zainab woke early, her heart racing with anticipation. The decision she had made now felt irreversible. As she packed her small bag with a few essentials clothes, toiletries, and a small gift for Chaik, she felt a mix of emotions. There was excitement, yes, but also fear. What if this trip led to something she wasn't ready for? What if Chaik wasn't as kind as he seemed? Or worse, what if the trip changed her forever in ways she couldn't predict? Zainab's mother called her to the kitchen where she was preparing breakfast. "Are you sure you want to go to Lagos, my daughter?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Zainab hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, Mama. Chaik invited me, and I think it will be a nice chance to experience the city." Her mother nodded, but Zainab could see the concern in her eyes. "Just remember who you are, Zainab. No matter where you go, never forget where you come from. Protect your heart." The words hit Zainab harder than she expected. She had always thought of herself as strong and independent. But now, standing in front of her mother, those words took on a new weight. Could she truly protect her heart in a place as unfamiliar and overwhelming as Lagos? Would she return to the village as the same person she had always been? Or would the city change her in ways she couldn't foresee? "I will, Mama," Zainab said softly, trying to reassure both her mother and herself. "I'll be careful." Her mother smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I know you will, my daughter. Just remember, love is not something to be rushed. It should come when you least expect it, and it should come with respect." Zainab nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She was leaving her home, her family, and the comfort of the life she had always known. But she was also stepping into something new, something that promised to challenge her, to shape her, and perhaps to change her forever. As Zainab stepped out the door and onto the bus that would take her to Lagos, she felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was heading into the unknown, and there was no turning back. The journey from her village to Lagos felt endless. As the bus rumbled down the dusty roads, Zainab's thoughts were a whirlwind. She had not slept much the night before, her mind replaying the conversation with her mother, the weight of her family's expectations, and the looming question of whether she was making the right choice. The bus was packed, and the air was thick with the scent of sweat and the chatter of passengers. Zainab sat by the window, her fingers gripping her bag tightly, as she watched the landscape change from the calm, rural countryside to the sprawling, chaotic outskirts of Lagos. It wasn't long before the bus entered the heart of the city, and Zainab's breath caught in her throat. Lagos was nothing like the village. The streets were crowded, alive with people, cars, and the unrelenting hum of city life. There were towering buildings, flashy billboards, and a constant rush of activity that made Zainab's village seem like a distant memory. She had heard stories about Lagos, the city of dreams. They called it, but now, standing in the middle of it, it felt like a different world entirely. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves as she stepped off the bus and onto the bustling streets. The heat was more intense here, the air heavier with pollution, and the sounds of honking cars and shouting vendors. But despite the overwhelming sense of chaos, Zainab couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement. This was the city she had heard so much about, the city that promised adventure and possibility, and Chiki had promised to show her the best of it. Zainab's phone buzzed in her hand, and she quickly checked the message from Chaik. "I'm waiting for you, Zainab. Can't wait to see you. I'll meet you at the bus stop." She smiled at the message, feeling her heart race a little faster. The excitement of seeing Chaik was beginning to override the nerves that had been gripping her ever since she left home. She made her way through the crowded bus terminal, her eyes scanning the sea of faces, hoping to spot him. And then she saw him. Chaik was standing near the entrance, his tall frame easily visible above the crowd. He waved at her, his smile wide and genuine. Zainab's heart skipped a beat. He looked even more handsome in person than she remembered, his dark skin glowing under the sunlight, his eyes sparkling with the same warmth she had seen in his messages. As she approached him, he opened his arms, pulling her into a hug that felt both comforting and thrilling at the same time. "It's so good to see you, Zainab," Chaik said, his voice rich with affection. "You look amazing." Zainab blushed, feeling a mix of pride and shyness. "Thank you, Chaik. It's good to see you too." Chaik looked at her with admiration, his eyes scanning her face as if memorizing every detail. Zainab felt a rush of emotion, happiness, nervousness, and a slight feeling of unease, as if she were about to step into uncharted territory. But for the moment, all that mattered was that she was here, in Lagos, with Chaik. "Let's get you settled in," Chaik said, taking her bag from her. "I've got a nice place for us to relax. We can go out later and enjoy the city. I know you'll love it." Zainab nodded, feeling her heart swell at the thought of spending the day with him. As they walked through the busy streets, Chaik kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking her about her journey, about her life in the village, and about what she hoped to see in Lagos. Zainab listened, her nerves slowly beginning to ease as Chaik's warmth and charm took over. He was easy to talk to, and she found herself laughing at his jokes, enjoying the way he made her feel special, as if she were the only person in the world. When they arrived at his apartment, Zainab was taken aback by how different it was from her village. The apartment was small but modern, with sleek furniture, colorful paintings on the walls, and large windows that offered a stunning view of the city. The space smelled of fresh flowers and scented candles, a stark contrast to the earthy, more utilitarian homes in her village. Zainab felt like she was stepping into a different reality, one that seemed both glamorous and intimidating at the same time. Chaik offered her a seat on the sofa, then went to the kitchen to prepare some drinks. Zainab sat there, taking in her surroundings, trying to wrap her mind around the fact that she was in Lagos, in Chiki's apartment, alone with him. She had never imagined that her first trip to the city would be like this, so personal, so intimate. Her heart raced again, this time with a sense of anticipation. When Chaik returned with 2 glasses of juice, he sat down beside her, a little closer than Zainab had expected. "I'm glad you came, Zainab," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I've been looking forward to this. We've got so much to catch up on." Zainab smiled, but her stomach fluttered. She hadn't realized how much she had missed him, how much she had thought about him in the weeks since their last meeting. She hadn't expected this connection to feel so strong, so immediate. It was as if they had picked up right where they had left off, as if the distance between their Worldshire village and his city had dissolved in the moment they had seen each other again. The conversation flowed easily between them, but as the evening wore on, Zainab started to notice something in Chaik's behavior that made her uneasy. His compliments had become more frequent, more intimate. He would look at her with a kind of intensity that made Zainab feel both special and vulnerable. He spoke of love, of the future, of what they could be together. But there was something in his words that felt a little too persuasive, a little too eager. At one point, Chike reached for her hand, gently squeezing it. "Zainab, you don't know how long I've waited for this moment," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I've thought about you a lot since we last saw each other. I feel like we have something special, something that could be more than just this trip." Zainab's heart skipped a beat. She had always thought about Chaik, but the way he was looking at her now made her feel unsure of her own feelings. She had come to Lagos expecting to have a good time, to see the city, to enjoy herself, but now, as she looked into Chaik's eyes, she wondered if something deeper was unfolding, something that she wasn't entirely ready for. Zainab started, but her words trailed off. She wasn't sure how to respond, how to explain the swirl of emotions she was feeling. Chaik leaned in closer, his breath warm against her skin. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just know that I'm here for you, Zainab. I want to make you feel special. I want you to know how much I care about you." Zainab's mind raced. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground. She had come here with no intention of falling into something she wasn't ready for, yet Chaik's presence, his warmth, and the intensity of his affection were beginning to cloud her judgment. As the evening unfolded, Zainab felt her pulse quicken with every passing moment. The apartment, which had once seemed like a welcome change from the simplicity of her village, now felt a little too close, a little too intimate. Chaik's easy charm and affectionate gestures were beginning to feel like something more, something deeper, and perhaps more dangerous than she had anticipated. She had come to Lagos seeking adventure, but now she was faced with a growing sense of uncertainty. Chaik's hand remained on hers, and he kept leaning in just a little closer with each passing word. His smile was warm, his words soft and inviting, but there was a tension in the air, something unspoken, something that made Zainab's stomach flutter in an unsettling way. She could feel the heat from his body radiating toward her, and it made her wonder if this was the moment when things might go further than she had ever expected. "You know," Chaik said, his voice almost a whisper, "you're even more beautiful than I remembered. It's like you've been made for moments like this, just the two of us, in a place where nothing matters except being together." Zainab's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, this kind of intensity. She had grown up with the quiet expectation that love would be slow, gradual, and built on trust over time. But Chaik wasn't asking for that kind of patience. His gaze was steady, and his words made her feel like she was the center of his world, something she had longed for, but never in this way. I don't know what to say, Chaik," she murmured, her voice low and hesitant. Chaik smiled, but there was something in his smile that made Zainab's chest tighten. He leaned closer, his face just inches from hers. "You don't have to say anything. Just trust me, Zainab. Trust what we have here, right now. It's real. It's special. Let's not let it slip away." Zainab felt a surge of emotion, a mix of desire, confusion, and fear. She had come to Lagos expecting to have fun, to experience something new, but she hadn't anticipated this kind of intensity. The pressure was mounting, and she felt like she was being drawn into a whirlpool of emotions she wasn't ready to navigate. Her heart told her to be cautious, but her body was responding in ways she hadn't expected. "Chaik, too don't know if I'm ready for this," Zainab stammered, pulling her hand away from his gently. "I mean, I didn't come here for this." Chaik's expression softened, but there was still that glimmer of something in his eyes of determination that made Zainab uneasy. He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb grazing her skin in a way that made her shiver. "You don't have to be ready, Zainab," he said, his voice low and coaxing. "I'm not going to rush you. I just want you to feel what I feel. Don't you feel it too? The connection between us? It's undeniable." Zainab could feel her pulse racing, her head spinning with conflicting emotions. She had been taught that love was about patience, trust, and respect, that it was about waiting for the right person, the right time. But Chaik's presence, his touch, his words, all of it felt so consuming, so powerful. And for a brief moment, Zainab wondered if maybe she had been wrong all along. Maybe she wasn't supposed to wait. Maybe she was supposed to experience this. Maybe this was what love truly felt: liquor, intense and immediate. But then, in the back of her mind, Zainab remembered her mother's words. "Protect your heart, Zainab. Don't let anyone make you feel like you owe them something. Not your body, not your love." The memory of her mother's warnings was enough to bring Zainab back to reality. She was not ready for this, not yet. I don't think I can, Chaik," Zainab said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I didn't come here for this kind of closeness. I don't know if I'm ready to go that far." Chaik's eyes darkened slightly, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled this time. The smile wasn't warm or inviting. It was patient, almost as if he had anticipated her hesitation. "That's okay, Zainab," he said softly. "There's no rush. I respect your feelings, but just know that I care about you. And when you're ready, I'll be here. I'll always be here." Zainab nodded, trying to steady her breath, though her heart was still racing. She could feel the tension in her chest, the pull of desire, and the weight of her decision pressing down on her. It wasn't just about Cheek anymore, it was about herself, about the choices she was making, and about how far she was willing to go to experience the world beyond her village. For the rest of the evening, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: movies, food, and the music they both enjoyed. But the undercurrent of what had just passed lingered between them like an invisible thread. Zainab could feel it, and she could see it in Chaik's eyes. He wasn't angry, he wasn't upset. But there was something else there, something she couldn't quite place. Was it disappointment? Or was it something else entirely? Later that night after dinner, Chaik suggested they go out to one of the local clubs. "You've never been to a Lagos nightclub, have you?" he asked with a grin. "I promise you'll love it. The lights, the music hits like nothing else." Zainab hesitated for a moment, unsure if she wanted to go out so soon. But she had come to Lagos to experience the city, to break free from the quiet life she had known. She didn't want to back out now, especially when Chaik was making such an effort to make her feel special. "Okay," she agreed, her voice soft. "Let's go." The club was everything Zainab had imagined, and more: bright lights, pulsating music, and a crowd of people dancing as if there was no tomorrow. The energy in the air was intoxicating, and for a while, Zainab let herself get swept up in the rhythm of the music. Chaik stayed close, his hand occasionally brushing against hers as they danced together, moving in sync with the beat. But as the night wore on, Zainab began to feel the weight of the earlier conversation lingering in her mind. The flashing lights, the music, the energy of the klubit all seemed so far removed from the quiet village life she had left behind. She wasn't sure if she was ready for all of this, the attention, the pressure, and the decisions that seemed to be coming at her so fast. At one point, Chaik pulled her closer, his hands resting lightly on her waist as they danced. Zainab could feel the heat of his body against hers, and for a moment, she felt completely lost in the moment. But then, the realization hit her hard. This wasn't what she had come here for. She didn't want to be just another girl in the crowd. She didn't want to lose herself in the frenzy of the night. "Cheek, I think I need some air," Zainab said, her voice barely audible over the music. Chaik raised an eyebrow, but didn't question her. "Of course, let's take a break." They stepped outside into the cool night air, the sounds of the club fading behind them. Zainab took a deep breath, trying to clear her head. She didn't know what to feel, whether she was happy, confused, or overwhelmed. Chaik stood beside her, watching her with a quiet intensity. "You okay?" he asked softly. Zainab nodded, but deep down, she wasn't sure. This was exactly what she had feared, being caught up in something that wasn't truly hers to control. The following morning, Zainab awoke with a dull headache, the kind that lingered after a night of loud music and flashing lights. The early morning sunlight poured in through the large windows, casting a soft glow on the room. She blinked a few times, trying to adjust to the brightness, and then glanced around. The apartment, with its modern furniture and polished surfaces, seemed almost foreign, now too sterile, too perfect for the turmoil that had churned inside her last night. She sat up slowly, clutching the blanket around her for warmth. Her body felt strange heavy and light at the same time. The events of the night before flooded back into her memory. The music, the dancing, the closeness with Chaik, and then the quiet moments they shared. She could still feel his touch on her waist, his breath close to her ear as they swayed to the beat, his lips pressing against hers in a kiss that felt both urgent and tender. The whole night had been a blur, a mix of exhilaration and confusion. Zainab's heart sank as she realized that she had crossed a line she never thought she would. She had been so sure of herself when she left the village, determined to explore the world beyond her home, to experience life on her own terms. But now, as she sat there in the silence of the morning, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret, a gnawing emptiness in her chest that refused to be ignored. Chaik stirred beside her, his arm resting lazily across her waist. He was still asleep, his breathing steady and calm. Zainab took a deep breath, her chest tightening as she slowly slipped out from under the covers. She didn't want to wake him, not yet. She needed space, needed time to think, to process what had happened. As she moved quietly to the bathroom, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, but it didn't feel like the Zainab she had known for the last 18 years. Her hair was messy, her skin flushed with the remnants of the night, and her eyes seemed different. There was a sadness there, a quiet resignation that made her heart ache. How had she let herself get here? How had she allowed herself to give in to the pull of desire, to let the moment consume her? She splashed water on her face, hoping to wash away the overwhelming sense of guilt that had settled in her chest, but it didn't help. The truth was there, and no amount of water or time could erase it. Zainab had given herself to Chaik, and now she wasn't sure where she stood, whether she could ever return to the innocent, controlled girl she had been when she left her village. And worse, she didn't know how to face Chaik, how to face herself, knowing what had happened between them. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, Chaik was awake. He was sitting up in bed, his eyes still heavy with sleep, but full of warmth. He smiled at her, a genuine smile that made Zainab feel both comforted and unsettled at the same time. "Good morning," Chaik said softly, his voice still thick with sleep. "How did you sleep?" Zainab hesitated before answering, her throat dry. I'm not sure," she murmured. "It's been a lot to process." Chaik frowned slightly, sensing the distance in her voice. "Hey, it's okay," he said, his tone gentle but insistent. "I'm not going anywhere. We don't have to rush anything. Last night was special, but I want to take things slow too. I care about you, Zainab." His words should have comforted her, should have eased the tension building in her chest, but instead, they only seemed to deepen her confusion. Chaik's words, though kind, felt hollow. Did he really care about her? Or was she just another girl to him? Another fleeting moment in his fast-paced life? "I'm not sure what I'm feeling right now, Chaik," Zainab said, her voice trembling. I need some time to think. I don't know if I'm ready for this, for what happened between us." Chaik's smile faded, but he didn't look angry. Instead, he looked concerned, almost as if he had anticipated this response. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "Zainab, I understand," he said quietly. "I don't want to pressure you. I just want you to know that I care about you. We don't have to make any decisions right now. We can take things slow." But Zainab wasn't sure if she could take things slow. Her mind was racing, her heart was heavy, and her body felt like a stranger to her. What had happened between them last night was real, she couldn't deny that. but it had also felt like a mistake, like something she hadn't truly been prepared for. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of quiet conversation. Chaik suggested they go out to breakfast, but Zainab couldn't shake the feeling that she was suffocating. She needed space. She needed to get away from him, away from the intensity of the city, away from the pressure that seemed to surround her. "I think I need some time alone," she said finally, standing up from the bed. "I think I need to think things through." Chaik looked at her with a mixture of concern and understanding. "I get it, Zainab. Take all the time you need. But just know that I'm here for you. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." Zainab nodded, though her heart ached. She didn't know what she was ready for. She didn't know if she could ever truly be ready for what had happened between them. She walked out of the apartment, leaving Chaik behind, and stepped out into the streets of Lagos. The city was bustling, as it always was, but today it felt different to Zainab. It felt like a foreign land, a place where she didn't quite belong. The weight of her decisions hung over her like a cloud, and no amount of city noise or activity could drown it out. Zainab wandered the streets aimlessly, her mind a blur of conflicting thoughts and emotions. She thought about her family, her mother's warnings, her father's expectations. She thought about the village, about the life she had left behind. Was this really the life she wanted? Was this what love was? Was this what it meant to step into the world outside her small, controlled existence? For hours, Zainab walked. She passed markets, street vendors, and people hurrying to and from their destinations. But she felt like she was floating through it all, disconnected from the world around her. The city, once so full of promise, now seemed like a place of uncertainty, a place where she couldn't find peace. As the sun began to set, Zainab finally made her way back to Chaik's apartment. She didn't know what she was going to say to him, but she knew that she couldn't keep running away from her feelings. She had to face the truth, no matter how difficult it was. When she returned to the apartment, Chaik was sitting on the couch, watching television. He looked up when she entered, his face softening with relief. "You okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Zainab took a deep breath, her heart heavy with emotion. "Chaik, I don't know what to do. I feel like I've made a mistake. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this, for us." Chaik didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her with those steady, patient eyes, as though waiting for her to find the right words. And as Zainab stood there, struggling to make sense of her emotions, she realized that the answer wasn't with Chaik or the city, it was within her. She had to understand herself before she could make any decisions about her future. "I need time, Chaik," Zainab said softly, her voice trembling. "I need to figure out what I want and what I need. I don't know if I can give myself to anyone right now." Chaik nodded, his expression unreadable. "I understand, Zainab. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Zainab finally exhaled, feeling a small sense of relief. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was taking control of her own life. If I ask what you've learned, what would be your response? Join me next time for more captivating story like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss it before you go. Help me grow this community. Hit that like button for more thrilling content. Subscribe for new uploads. Comment below with your theories and reactions. Share with friends and family who love a good story. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching Gobrian Stories and for being an amazing part of this journey.